if we could had a time machine and could go back into the 19th century and we were walking around, 1800s London, not only would everything look very different, but it would sound really different. And one of the ways in which it would sound different would be these church bells, which would be in church towers, which would be ubiquitous. It'd be everywhere. And, if you've ever lived in a place that has a prominent church bell, if you ever lived in a really, really small town, bells toll the hour, but they also have distinctive chimes for quarter hours. So, if you're walking around, you can kind of organize your schedule without ever having to look at your watch. The other things the other reasons why you might hear these bells would be to announce different events. So maybe it's a death now, maybe somebody has died, maybe it's a celebration, maybe it's marking like a big political event. But basically, in the background hubbub of noise in people's lives, there'd be these bells sounding all the time. So let's go ahead and dive right into stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighboring church struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, from 7 to 8, regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12? It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12, then stopped. Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge, that I can't have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun and that this is 12 at noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of this first of exchange paid to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his order, and so forth, would become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavored not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself after mature inquiry that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. So, this is very relatable. First of all, I am totally capable of sleeping all day and into the night, but evidently Scrooge is not. And the other thing that's relatable is, this idea of lying in bed at night and you can't get this idea out of your head, and the more that you try to avoid thinking about it, it's pink elephant effect. You just have to think about it. Okay. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced that he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length, it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong, 1/4 said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong, 1/2, said Scrooge. There's lots of dinging and donging. Ding dong, 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong, the hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. Okay, I just have to call your attention to that. It's just truly marvelous, the consonants that he puts in there, because once again, it's like he makes a little sound effect with his word choices. So if you say those words out loud, listen to the D's and the N's and the O's and the L's. Deep, dull, hollow, melancholy, one. So, that gives us the feeling of a, this is not like a little tiny bell, of a great big bell ringing. Also, note what he pulls aside. He pulls aside bed curtains. So when I was a kid, I thought that this would be like the most fancy thing that could possibly ever happen, would be to sleep in a 4-poster bed that had bed curtains around it. Possibly because I read too many books that were set in the 1800s. But yeah, if you had, a great big nice bed, you'd want to have the bed curtains around it so that you're not getting woken up by, light every morning. So he's got these bed curtains, and before he's opened the bed curtains, he's really kind of in this little darkened space, which is his bed nook. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. Okay, before we dive into the description of the Ghost of Christmas Past, this is going to sound weird, but I want you to picture all of these ghosts as kind of like Batman. So there have been, golly, how many different Batman movies have there been? There's been like Tobey Maguire Batman. There's been whoever Emma Stone's boyfriend was Batman. The kid Batman that's out right now. Oh, shoot. I keep saying Batman and I mean Spider-Man. All right, I hope I didn't just lose all my listeners. But yeah. Superhero. So there's all these Spider-Man movies, and for that matter, there's Michael Keaton Batman. There's, golly, Affleck Batman. All right, I probably shouldn't use that as an example because it's just so upsetting. But in any case, whenever we see these different actors in the movies, we never get confused. It's not like I, go see Batfleck. Jeez, whose idea was that? It's not like I go see Batfleck and then I'm like, why is Ben Affleck? No, actually that's a terrible example because I really did have the thought, why is Ben Affleck dressed up like Batman? But my point was supposed to be that, the character of Batman is independent of whichever actor is portraying him. And it's generally not confusing. And not only that, these characters are so much into our pop culture that I could put like a red hat with a white pom-pom on any of these Batman, and nobody would think like, oh, that's Santa Claus. All of us would be able to register the different layers of like, yeah, that's Batman, Santa Claus. There's like Lego Batman out. So in this story, the base layer is all of us understand, because the ghost of Jacob Marley has already told us, that there are 3 ghosts. And all of us also understand, because we have seen 50,000 million movie adaptations of this, that the ghosts are past, present, and future. But they're also allegorical figures. So I'm going to read the description of the first one, and we'll see if we can figure out what this figure is representing, in addition to embodying Ghost of Christmas Past. So it was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportion. So far, he's old, he's young. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. Okay, so he's old, it's young, it's got a really muscular, strong grip, so it can hold on to something. It's wearing kind of summer clothes. It's got this really shiny belt around it. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. So it's young, it's old, it's summer, it's winter at the same time. Got a very strong grip, shiny. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all of this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality. For as its belt sparkled and glittered, now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. Okay, so recapping here. It's old, it's young, it's summer, winter. Lights shooting out of its head. It's got an extinguisher cap. It's constantly changing its shape and form. This is a weird looking figure. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge did not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend or any knowledge of having willfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Okay, so Ghost of Christmas Past. Old, young, winter, summer, shiny, light shooting out of its head, very strong grip, changes form, seems to be close by, far away at the same time, has an extinguisher cap, and makes Scrooge deeply, deeply, deeply uncomfortable. That is because the Ghost of Christmas Past is an allegory or a symbol for memory. It's memory itself. So think about how your memories want to hold on to you, but they're never quite the same. They change. And think about what does it mean about Scrooge that he's so desperate to shut down the light of memory, okay? Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but he could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation then, take heed." So it's like, minorly hilarious that when, the spirit of his past, like memory itself, shows up on his doorstep and says, "I'm here for your welfare, I'm here for your well-being." The Scrooge, basically tells him, yeah, well, maybe let me get a night of rest, and that would be pretty good. Okay, so the ghost, it put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes. That bed was warm, the thermometer a long way below freezing. He was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap. He had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made toward the window, clasped his robe in supplication. I am a mortal, Scrooge remonstrated, and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. So this dynamic of like Scrooge being like, well, I could take a nap, I'm not wearing the right shoes, I'm kind of tired, and the spirit's always speaking in this really elevated language. That continues through the whole story. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. Good heavens, said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. So I think that this is a good stopping place for this episode. I will see you guys next time.